Hello and welcome into another edition of New Track Record. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney with you, coming to you from the Allen County Public Library studios of WELT. And Justin, it's come, it's gone, the 108th running of the Indianapolis 500, and Josef Newgarden goes back-to-back, earns the $440,000 bonus from Borg Warner for doing so. First, of course, since Helio Castroneves did it in 2001 and 2002. And here we are, a guy who, just over a year ago, the questions were, is he going to win a race? We were questioning Penske, and they struggled in qualifying. Well, now this year they fix qualifying. They go back-to-back. They put a car on the pole. They sweep the front row. A lot has changed in just over a year.
It has, and just another chapter in the topsy-turvy, dramatic season for Penske that it has been already. And we're not even, we barely even a third of the way through the season?
Yeah, not even, technically.
And a part of me almost looked at this and said, well, we should have known this was going to happen. Maybe not necessarily Team Penske domination, but Josef Newgarden. Of course, we've chronicled everything that he's gone through and the reaction to what he's said and done and everything behind the scenes. But it just felt like not a redemption, but almost like a giant middle finger up to everybody, and almost said as much after the race and all that. If you like Josef Newgarden, you really like the outcome of this race. If you don't like Josef Newgarden, which there are more in that camp than there was this time last year, then you didn't like the result. But I can't say I'm surprised. Josef Newgarden, in my opinion, is the most well-rounded driver in this series, and he proved that even with a lot of people against him, whether it's in the paddock, outside the paddock, he can still go out there, perform without Tim Cindric, right, and get it done, and makes the pass on the backstretch for the victory, his second straight 500 victory.
And I guess that's kind of the biggest takeaway for me as we start our three things from this race. A wild race, a delayed race due to the rain right around the time we would have had, opening ceremonies and pre-race and green flag. It was raining. So I guess my number one takeaway, despite all the noise and everything surrounding Josef Newgarden within the past month, the fact that he's now a two-time Indianapolis 500 champion, I mean, it says a lot about him and the team, the ability to just move forward, because there are so many distractions. You have, you mentioned, right? Tim Cindric, not on the stand. Jonathan Duguid, who's with Penske Porsche Motorsport, that program, calling the race for Newgarden. You obviously have what happened in the aftermath of St. Pete and the push-to-pass gate and all that mess. You have the fact that Scott McLaughlin claimed the pole. Penske's on the front row. There's a lot of buzz about that. And it was Newgarden who has gone from 0 Indy 500 wins to 2 in just over a calendar year span. And he is, as you mentioned, the most well-rounded driver, whether it's super speedway, whether it is short oval, where he's the best by far, it's not even close,
right?
To road course and street course, he's probably the most well-rounded driver in the series. Now, is he consistent enough to win championships? I don't know. He hasn't won a title since 2019. That seems to be eating at him, but at least he's crossed off the Indy 500 not once but twice now, and we'll see what happens the rest of the season. But he certainly made a statement after the previous month where everyone was circling him like vultures.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at just what really has gone into it, too, for Josef Newgarden. This was a race that almost borderline obsession. It wasn't even borderline. It was an obsession for him to win the Indianapolis 500, and it was almost more relief than ecstasy last year. There was plenty of excitement, but almost relief. This year was bona fide excitement after winning that race, especially with what he felt like was a lot of pressure on him and what he has gone through. And I'm not saying, poor Josef and et cetera, but this is something too, when people talk about points, and now that we're post 500, we start talking about points. He's only 7th in the standings. And as you mentioned earlier, his forte is short ovals. We have Iowa. We have Milwaukee. We have Nashville, which is a bigger oval, but we know how good he is in ovals. I know people kind of wanted to say, well, he's after his penalty, his disqualification, he's not winning the championship. I'm not putting anything past Josef Newgarden right now because his strength is events that are still coming up on the schedule. So don't count him out 7th in the standings.
See, you know what? I disagree. He already has 3 results outside the top 15. Alex Palou has finished top 5 in every race so far.
Well,
this
Joseph,
year.
He's going to need wins. I mean, that's the big thing. To win it, he's going to need wins. But we've seen him win at short ovals and dominate too. So, but I think everybody really, I mean, I don't think you can count him out. I think it's still the odds are against him, but I think he could, at this point, who knows? It's Josef Newgarden. He would have a better chance than anybody else, in my opinion, because of his stature. But going back to the Indianapolis 500 and just the ability for him, because you and I were texting back and forth, and you were at the track and at the race, and I felt with 10, even 5 to go, you felt like, okay, this is going to be between Pato O'Ward and the McLarens. You felt like, and the McLarens and Scott Dixon were kind of in there. And Josef Newgarden, when Will Power faded, and then even Scott McLaughlin faded a little bit, Josef Newgarden was there and put the pressure on. You can look at Pato's strategy going on the backstretch, coming out of turn 2, trying the snake. I don't know if he would have been passed even not doing the snake, but it felt like him snaking to the inside part of the track just cost him all of the momentum. Because coming out of turn 2, it looked like he had plenty of room to spare. But was that just Josef Newgarden's ability to get off the turn, or was it Pato O'Ward's mistake trying to snake, or a combination of the two? I'm not smart enough to know.
Well, and I forget, and this was listening post-race, walking back to the car. I don't remember if it was Newgarden or Pato or one of the drivers saying, you know, they could tell that Pato was stronger on the south end of the track and weaker on the north end. So, I mean, obviously that played a role.
A little bit.
I mean, these drivers, think about the last 15, 20 laps. And the way they were swapping leads back and forth just because it was perfect conditions for that. Cool. You have clouds. You have shadows over the track. So speeds are at a premium at that point. And you're trying to figure out at that point in the race, okay, what can I do with my car that this guy can't do, and vice versa, and figure out, you know, where they're strong, where they're weak, setting everything up for that perfect pass. And we thought that's what Pato had done, right?
Right. On lap
I mean,
199.
Newgarden's won back-to-back Indy 500s, and he hasn't led lap 199 in either of them.
Wild.
It's mind-blowing.
You look at it and you could say, well, Pato O'Ward made that pass 1 lap too early for the lead on lap 199. But you can come back and say, you want to be leading because at any time a yellow could come out.
Well,
and the race is over.
He backed out of a pass going into, I think it was turn 3 on lap 198?
198, a lap before. And then you're looking at it and you're thinking, and especially with the amount of cautions that we had on Sunday, granted the last one was on lap 154, so we raced the final 46 laps under green, but you felt like, okay, do you wait until the final lap to make that move? Because everybody says you want to be second, right? Do you wait to make that final move, or do you take the lead, hope you can hold off the people behind you, and if you quote unquote luck into a caution, the race is over? And it just felt like it's tough to blame Pato O'Ward and say, well, you should have waited, because who knows if the yellow would have came out.
No, you got to go for it. And the fact that he even backed off the first time was kind of shocking, but he was kind of playing the averages in terms of when to make the move. And he made the move, I feel like, when he thought he should. I mean, that's where his car was stronger.
Right. And
it is what it is. But for Josef Newgarden, I mean, to only lead 26 laps, you don't lead lap 199, but he was there when it mattered, and that's the difference. I mean, whereas Will Power never had a car to fight for anything on Sunday, he dropped back pretty early. Scott McLaughlin only seemed to have a car when he was toward the front of the line.
Right.
He couldn't get through. If he got back, 5th, 6th, 7th, it was a lot harder for him to work his way up through the field, and he finished in that range. But Josef Newgarden could seemingly get to the front when he wanted to and needed to, and then kind of hang back at other times, and that to me felt like a big difference.
It did, and make no mistake, the caution that came out at 146 that basically reset everything, because before that we had conflicting strategies. Were you going to people that were pitting, because for a while it looked like Scott Dixon was in the commander's chair. I mean, Stingray Robb was up there, and remember, Josef Newgarden pitted one time less than Pato O'Ward and Scott Dixon, who finished second and third respectively. But that caution that came out 147 really made it a sprint to the end. And everybody had to pit one more time, and it threw that out the window. So it helped Josef Newgarden in that respect. Plenty of stuff happened after lap 147, but you have to look at that final caution, and that caution came about with Ryan Hunter-Reay getting into the wall.
That's one way to put it.
We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But make no mistake, that caution helped tremendously for a guy that pitted one less time than the second and third place finishers.
All right. With that said, and you talked about pit stops, Newgarden with 5, the other contenders, Pato O'Ward, Scott Dixon with 6. And what was the stat? Right? Pit stops. You want to be 5 because the last winner with 6 or more was Pagenaud in 2019.
Really? You want to be 5?
That was one of those stats going into the race. But what's your first takeaway?
Well, I think it's a combination, too, with what we talked about in Pato O'Ward.
Yeah.
Let's delve deeper into it, because he, once again, has come so close to winning this race. What is it, 2 seconds and a third? Is that what it is, or just 2 seconds?
2 seconds and I think a fourth, because he was, in 2020, was he fourth that year? Because obviously he didn't qualify in 2019 in his first attempt. He was fourth in 21. That's when I'm mixing it up, and then sixth in 2020. He's finished top 6 outside of last year when he crashed out battling for the lead late in the race.
Right,
he's finished top 6 in all the other starts, and he started in the upper half of the field. I mean, he's with a great team. I think it's clear that McLaren for sure usurped Ganassi at Indy this year.
Right.
Last year was more of the, okay, it's great, you have fast cars, but you got to finish the race. This year, their contenders were up front when it mattered. But he has the team, he has the skill, the ability. You don't want to think, though, this is a guy that's never going to win the Indy 500, right? But is that fear already creeping in, even though he's 25?
No, I don't think so. I think you get into the early 30s, that's when you kind of start really getting serious about it. But here's something that I don't know is an impactful thing or not, because yes, late in the race, you don't care about teammates, but you also have to make sure you're respecting your teammates. So when you look at the top 5 and you had 2 Ganassis up there, 2 McLarens, and a Penske, Josef Newgarden, and you would think, okay, maybe that helps having a teammate up there. In my opinion, it's advantageous to not, because you're not worried about anything else up front. You're not worried about where your teammate is. You're hearing in your ear, let your teammate be careful, even though, yes, it's the final few laps of the 500. I think that was an advantage for Josef Newgarden. He had 2 teammates from McLaren and 2 teammates from Ganassi behind him or amidst him in those final couple laps. And I can't discount the fact that maybe that was advantage Newgarden not having to worry about where teammates were. But going back to Pato O'Ward, I'm not worried. I think he's going to win one. But how great would it be for this series for Pato O'Ward to win the Indianapolis 500? And when's the last time we said that for a non-American?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great point.
I mean, even people say with Fernando Alonso won the race. I'm like,
we're talking full-time drivers, right, or drivers who've been around the series for a lot. Yeah, I can't really think of. I mean, Tony Kanaan, right? I mean, that's probably the last time.
Yeah, or Elio to win the 4th, I guess.
Yeah. But as far as a first time,
right, I
would say you go back to TK in 2013.
So
popular driver, fan favorite, heartbreak at Indy.
I mean, you almost felt like, okay, Pato O'Ward won the Indianapolis 500. They got to go to Mexico and race within the next couple of years, right? I mean, that's kind of
they need to do that regardless.
Regardless, yes.
I mean, the cheers from the crowd.
And you were there. So tell the cheers compared to Pato and Josef.
I'd say it was louder for Pato.
And that's everything that I've read too, was that it was louder for Pato.
Now, obviously on the last lap when you see Newgarden, I'm sitting basically toward turn 4 but somewhat in the short chute, And when you see Newgarden, I mean, obviously people are cheering, going crazy because you're seeing a pass for the lead
yeah,
going
for
into,
sure.
on the outside of turn 3 on the final lap, which is just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say Pato O'Ward has definitely become the most popular driver in the series. I don't think it's that close. That's the crazy thing.
It's tough to argue with the amount of fans.
And there are a lot of Dixon fans. There are a lot of
McLaren fans
overall,
which
but Pato, far and away, I think is the most popular driver in the field.
And I think something too to close out, my topic for number 1 is just how much respect between Josef Newgarden and Pato O'Ward there was in that final turn. Because from the television angle, you were just waiting for one or both to spin out. It looked like a Dario Takuma Sato scenario, where at least one of them wasn't going to make it through turn 3. And credit to both of them with obviously the biggest race in the world, final lap and next to last turn, having the respect of each other to make sure one or both didn't end up in the wall.
And the fact that Newgarden could pull off, and he did earlier in the race, I forget what stage it was, but he did pull off, an outside pass into turn 3.
Yeah.
But that's really difficult, and that tells you have far and away a really good car. And while Pato could lead, it seemed like Newgarden could just pick his spots and do whatever he wanted. But for Pato O'Ward, IndyCar's got to capitalize, and getting a race in Mexico, anywhere in Mexico, anywhere in South America for that matter, just should be a top priority. And I don't know if and when that's going to happen.
It's frustrating because I can understand the politics becoming involved when you look at Argentina and Brazil and blah, blah, blah. But like Mexico, make that happen. Everybody can just drive there and drive across the border and go. You got to make that happen. Even if it's a risk, this is what we're talking about. Series taking a risk, even if they have to front some of the money. It will be an insanely big crowd in Mexico. And you're waiting, and there's murmurs of NASCAR getting down there. And we know how that goes. If NASCAR gets a foothold first, IndyCar won't be welcome. You can share Mexico. There could be races in both, but but that's only if IndyCar gets there first. If NASCAR gets there first, IndyCar doesn't have a prayer. What's your number 2?
My number 2. What a disastrous day for Andretti Global. I don't know the other word to describe it. Kyle Kirkwood somehow finished 7th after the pit road penalty, which, to be clear, I understand his argument. As we've learned in the NTT IndyCar series, officiating is all over the map.
No reason to it, right?
Some stuff, and we'll get to another incident in this race where we just simply didn't understand a no call.
Alexander Rossi, how's he get pulled in front of?
Yeah,
was it Herta? Herta had to slam on his brakes.
Yeah,
in pit road. He exited and went right into the fast lane. That's not allowed.
Correct. And everyone was doing that all race.
Yeah,
so
there was no rhyme or reason.
There was no consistency on pit road, no consistency on track, but that's what we expect. It is what it is. But for Andretti Global, Kyle Kirkwood's the bright spot. Somehow he finished 7th. He was up to 5th late in the race, fell back a couple spots, but that's the bright spot for the entire month. You have Marcus Ericsson taken out by Tom Blomqvist, turn 1, lap 1. Just brutal.
May have cost him his job. We'll get to that later.
And then you have Marco Andretti just simply losing it. Tried to save it about 5-6 times on a late restart, and he couldn't do so. And he was on the same fuel strategy as Daly and Robb and Dixon. So apparently he felt like he was looking good. He was never really running higher than about 15th for most of this race.
Yeah, he was kind of a non-factor, similar to Helio.
And I didn't get to the most important factor. That's Colton Herta, who was my pick for the race. Early on in the race, I'm like, he's picking off guys whenever he wants. He's moving up through the field.
We saw that throughout especially Carb Day. Mm-hmm. He was looking like one of the best cars out there.
And I based my pick last week on what he did on the Monday practice session, which is once again still the best kept secret for the month of May in terms of one of the best days you can go to the track and get access and not deal with crowds. But he threw away a potential race-winning car. I firmly believe that. And it was his mistake. And then you told me after the fact, because I went back and rewatched it, and on the broadcast they were saying the same thing that you were saying, and that's he just had front wing damage. Like,
yeah, why'd he get out of the car?
Just, ask for a restart and go around, go to the pits, replace the front wing, have him look over the car, go back out there. Yeah, you might be down a lap or two, but there's a chance you at least get one lap back at that stage of the race. And he would have eventually gotten the wave around.
Right.
So maybe you finish one lap down. Well, you finish one lap down, and you look at the finishing position for that. Yes, he only moves up one spot, but every spot matters when you're looking at the championship, and that's where we're at in this stage of the season. And he's tied for 5th with Pato O'Ward in the championship. So this is where... or tied for 4th, excuse me. This is where you have to make the right calls, and by him getting out of the car,
it ruined it.
It was already ruined by hitting the wall, but the fact that you could have gone back out there and had an outside shot of getting back into contention, it's an absolute disaster. This was one of the best cars in the field. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on that.
And granted, partly frustration, I'm sure, but you have to stay in the car. You have only front wing damage. You get it restarted. This happened on lap 86. You have plenty of time, if you're a lap down, to get that lap back, get the wave around, get back in the lead lap, and then who knows? And it's twofold. It's one, another unforced error by Colton Herta. The series desperately wants Colton Herta to be a factor in this series.
Well, he's also the highest paid driver in the series.
And he's not driving
needs
like
to be
it.
a factor.
Yes.
He started the year strong, and then we saw what happened in the Indy 500, an event where he's had fast cars. He's just got to put together a result.
Now,
Indy.
Kind of an asterisk with his salary, because it's kind of based on what they wanted to pay him if Andretti Global ever happened or happens or whatever. But it's still making a hell of a lot of money for making an error on track, and then B, an error in judgment to get out of the car. And he came back, and as soon as the car got back to the garage, they put a new wing on it and put him back in the car and sent him back out. But by then, he was down 25, 30 laps instead of 1. It's tough to take Colton Herta seriously in this series as a championship contender when he continues to make unforced errors.
And this was after a championship-level drive in the GP where his team made a mistake in qualifying, ran him out of fuel, and he found a way to finish 7th. And that was... It felt like he had turned a new leaf, and I get we're being maybe overreacting from race to race, but in the signature event, when you have a car capable of winning, you need to take advantage of it. And he did not on Sunday.
Well, and you can look, too, at his 6 Indianapolis 500s now, just 2 top 10s, and his best finish is 8th in 2020. It just hasn't been good, the 500 for Colton Herta, for whatever reason. Of course, a couple years ago, we were there on his crash on, was it Carb Day? Yeah. That's the loudest that I've heard a wreck during a practice session. It sounded like a sonic boom when he hit the wall, but was chasing it after that. Of course, finished 30th. Last year, snuck into the top 10, was 9th, but wasn't really a factor. And then this year, of course, crashing out. This is a guy that we felt or still feel he can bounce back as soon as this weekend at Detroit. And all of a sudden, if he jumps into the top 3 of the championship, you're saying, hey, he can be a championship contender. I just cannot buy him as a guy that can close a championship, let alone an Indy 500, because of the inconsistencies.
And it's not like he hasn't had good finishes in the championship either. That's the thing. Like, he's finished...
Third
the top, 3rd and 4th, right? And
3rd and 5th, I believe.
3rd and 5th? Yes, 3rd and 5th. He's a good driver. Look, he's a guy who should be capable of ripping off, 2-3 wins by the end of the season. And that's the kind of step forward you want to see him make before the end of the season, because last year was obviously a struggle.
And I don't want to sound cliche, because it definitely is cliche, and I joke about it every weekend, but because every driver always says this. But the series is so deep in talent, and the top end in particular is there's a lot of really, really good drivers in IndyCar, but there's only a few great drivers. And Colton Herta is costing himself opportunities to jump into that great category with his errors.
Yeah, I would agree. What's your number 2?
My number 2, let's talk about the Scott Dixon, Ryan Hunter-Reay incident. Because I was waiting. I mentioned to you how Josef Newgarden and Pato O'Ward miraculously didn't crash each other, or one of them. I was just waiting for that to happen for Scott Dixon to win the race, because that would totally be Scott Dixon, a guy that somehow does not get penalized for an obvious block that causes a crash and then would go on to win the Indianapolis 500 by the top 2 drivers in front of him crashing. I don't understand. You mentioned it about the inconsistencies of race control. How is that not a penalty? Clearly reactionary to the move that Ryan Hunter-Reay was making. You could say it was an aggressive move on the inside, but the lane was there until Scott Dixon reacted to it. It causes Ryan Hunter-Reay to crash. Ryan Hunter-Reay was cordial in the interview because him and Scott Dixon are friends, but I don't understand how anybody else, I don't want to say anybody else, but the majority of the field, if they do that, if Kiffin Simpson does that, he's getting penalized. So why isn't Scott Dixon? I don't understand it. Unless it's an obvious call, like speeding on pit road, Scott Dixon just never seems to get penalized, even when it's as obvious as what we saw on Sunday.
Yeah, it is what it is, and he's been, other drivers have kind of accused him of being the series' favorite son for going on 20 years.
Which I think is accurate.
As Townsend mentioned on the NBC broadcast, he mentioned the old Pruitt fade, right? And that's what that looked like, except there's no way you can tell me that between Scott and his spotter that Scott didn't know Hunter-Reay was coming.
Well, I know exactly. Scott Dixon is one of the greatest drivers in IndyCar history, greatest of his generation. He knows how to block without making it look like a block. If you jerk your wheel all the way over to block, that's going to get called. But that fade, that Pruitt fade, just slowly moving over, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt more often than not, especially if you're Scott Dixon on that. So a jerk of the wheel to immediately cut somebody off is getting called. But when you kind of casually drift over there and, my bad, you're probably going to get away with it, especially if you're Scott Dixon, and that's exactly what happened. It felt like it was setting up those final couple laps. If Newgarden and Pato O'Ward came together and took each other out, that it was going to be, of course, this is how Scott Dixon wins his second 500. The 2 guys crashing in front of him and him getting away with an obvious block and no penalty.
Thankfully, that's not what played out. But it still was a block.
And now he's second in the championship. Like, he shouldn't have finished third. He should have had at least a drive-through. And the fact that he got away with it, I think we could be looking at that later on in the season as maybe a big part of the points standings conversation in the run to a championship is Scott Dixon didn't deserve that third place finish. He clearly blocked Ryan Hunter-Reay and got away with it. And I can understand the frustrations of the paddock because it just seems like unless it's an obvious call, Scott Dixon always gets away with things in the series.
And how much is it that because he's a winner, he gets more of a benefit of the doubt than
huge.
Other drivers? We all know that's, and it's not intentional by officials, but that's just how it works in sports.
Yeah. It's just the way it is. But it was frustrating because I think when we go, we can expand this down to kind of all the calls that were questionable. I mentioned the Alexander Rossi pullout in the pits and how there was just no policing of guys going right from the pits into the fast lane because they call the opposite. They call if somebody goes from the fast lane right into the pits. So why don't they call the opposite? I don't understand.
My number 3?
Yes. What do you got?
Okay. Let's talk about Honda. Because this was...
They had a rough day today. Well,
this was a very bad day. Let's look at the order. 33rd, Marcus Ericsson, Honda. 32nd, Pietro Fittipaldi, Honda. 31st, Tom Blomqvist, Honda. That was, of course, the first turn of the first lap. Marcus Armstrong, 30th, Honda, engine failure. Catherine Legge, 29th, Honda, engine failure. Linus Lundqvist, 28th, he crashed out, Honda. Felix Rosenqvist, 27th, He had a top 10 car. He was looking good. Engine expired. Of course, he had a Honda. Then you get to 26 and Ryan Hunter-Reay in a Chevy. Then Marco Andretti, 25th. I mean, you have the first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, bottom 7 cars are Hondas. And you had 3 engine failures between Rosenquist, Catherine Legge, and Felix Rosenquist. Not a good month. And Honda obviously doesn't win the race. They struggle in qualifying. Do we take anything out of Honda's struggles and their future in the sport? Is it time to overreact, or is it this was just a rough day and they went for it and it just didn't work out?
Yeah, I just think it's one of those days where you're trying to get every last bit out of the car and out of the formula that you've had forever, because this time last week or earlier, we're talking about, oh my gosh, look at Chevy with the plenum fires. And it was kind of, we knew that was isolated to qualify because of the boost. But I think Honda was just pushing because their focus and Chevy's focus for that matter is winning the Indianapolis 500. And when you have an engine formula that's so similar for so long, you're just trying to look at every little edge. And I think Honda just pushed it a little bit too far. And I don't look at it as an indictment of the uncertainty of Honda continuing past 2026. But I do think it's a warning sign for an introspective look for Honda and say, what do we need to do? Yes. Maybe are we pushing it too far to try to match Chevy in horsepower, and our formula just can't handle it?
The other wrench to throw into all of this is the simple fact that the hybrid units were actually delivered last week, end of last week, and to the teams, and that will start at Mid-Ohio coming up, I believe, July 7th for that event. So that's another factor that could completely change how everything has run. And you look at the sports car guys in the field, if they have even just the slightest advantage having worked with hybrids,
right,
that helps them out, people with a lot of sports car experience. Or, of course, is it just going to help Scott Dixon? Because, of course, fuel save and power, all these little factors. So maybe that is something that evens it out. But at least at Indy, Chevy was dominant in qualifying, and they were dominant in the race.
Yes, I mean they were. It was frustrating for Honda. If you're Honda for back-to-back 500s for Chevy to win, but for a while Honda was dominant. Right, this is the ebbs and flows of engine wars, and I don't feel like it's a damning indictment against Honda for what happened. Sometimes you just push it too far in trying to win the biggest race in the world, and it happens. But when you look at the standings, as much as Honda cares more about the 500 in the they're 1-2 in the standings with Ganassi and Colton Herta there in 5. So is it more? I mean, and you look at and Chevy or Penske has Chevy, so it's like I think Honda goes back to the drawing board. I think they see what worked, what didn't this year for Indy, and come back. It's not like they're getting blown out and blown away by every Chevy team. It's just Penske, but reliability is important. And you can have all the speed in the world in May. If you can't run 500 miles without something happening to the car or the engine, doesn't matter. And too many issues happened with Honda over the course of the entire couple weeks. I mean, how many engines were changed even before the 500?
Yeah, I mean, Graham Rahal and was it Scott Dixon had 2 engine changes during May?
I mean, and several people had good. 1. I mean, Honda went through a lot of engines over the 2 weeks at Indianapolis, and even then didn't solve all the issues because of what we saw on Sunday. So definitely it's probably been an uncomfortable week for Honda officials this week on trying to figure out what went wrong and what they need to figure out for 2025. But I don't look at it as an indication that Honda is kind of cashing it in, so to speak.
And nothing better than if you're Honda getting a win at the Chevrolet Detroit Grand Prix coming up this weekend.
Be bad.
That would be a nice a nice way to
like a consolation
cap
prize,
yeah.
I guess. It
definitely consolation.
Yeah,
but it would be a nice little dig. What's your number 3?
My number 3. Let's talk about the day in general, because it was. I applaud IndyCar and IMS for making all the right decisions in terms of the weather. What my worry was is they would try to rush through at least the pre-race stuff. And you and I were talking about, like, hey, move up the start. But once you saw the weather, which kudos to the weather folks, knew exactly what said, there's going to be rain in the early afternoon. It's going to go away. We should have a window of some amount. It would have been easy for IndyCar and IMS to say, okay, let's rush through the pre-race stuff, whatever, or at least do that before the rain comes. And then once the rain is gone and we dry the track, we right away start the race. But IndyCar made a decision to basically not do much of anything. Yeah, they had the parade laps and all that stuff, but in terms of the big pre-race things, they waited until after the rain. And it felt like a complete event because of that. And I thought that was a credit to IndyCar. They made all the right decisions, I felt, on race day. Didn't try to rush things. Didn't try to, okay, we're going to get everything out of the way early, and then we can maybe race a couple laps, but then we'll come back. They made all the right decisions. You were there, and it sounded like they, well in advance of the storms coming around noon, around 11:15, they were telling people that they needed to vacate the track. So
Correct.
I thought everything was handled very, very professionally on Sunday.
Yeah, 11:15, fans had to be out of the stands. We just stayed at our tailgate. We just tailgate, park in someone's yard, as a lot of people do, outside Turn 4, that area, and we just hung out. And then when it started to rain, got in our cars with our group, hung out there, 30, 45 minutes, and then went back out and hung out under the canopy that we had set up with our chairs.
You had said the waterproof canopy, LOL. Was it
Yeah.
indeed waterproof when it started storming?
I mean, we went into the cars as soon as it started raining. So I cannot confirm if it was indeed waterproof, but we did our best. And, rain, weather, a factor leading into the weekend. Didn't seem to have any impact on the crowd. Yeah, maybe they would have sold a couple more thousand walk-up tickets, but they had less than 5,000 reserve seats unsold, apparently, and it showed on the broadcast. I mean, the crowd estimate, 345,000 essentially?
345,000, and usually the short shoot between 3 and 4 is kind of that last, that's where
and
you
there
see
were gaps,
the empties,
but it was
there were
better
hardly
than
any.
the previous year.
Yeah, I mean, you had to look hard to see the gaps, or maybe the straight overhead shot, you could see them a little better. That short shoot is usually the last kind of to fill, and it looked pretty damn full. So, just a credit to IndyCar, IMS. They approached the day in the right manner. The weather cooperated in the sense that, hey, it came in, it poured for a couple hours, it got out, and it just felt like a quote unquote normal Indianapolis 500 pre-race. All the pageantry, the race, all that. It just happened to start 4 hours later than usual.
And that showed with the crowd. It didn't impact TV. I think the Kyle Larson effect was alive and well. Despite the weather delay, total audience delivery, 5.344 million viewers across NBC Peacock, NBC Sports Digital, up 8% over last year and 10% compared to 2022. And you had the peak of nearly 6.5 million Newgarden battling award at the end of the race, and most streamed IndyCar race ever, 286,000 viewers across Peacock and NBC Sports Digital platforms.
Do you feel the race, and I'm not advocating that this needs to be a thing every year, do you feel like the rating was helped by the later start time?
I think it was helped, but I think the Larson effect probably was more.
How much? And I asked you, or I mentioned this, and you said you didn't think it was much of a factor. The blackout being lifted, and what did he get? Like an 18 rating,
18.5 or something,
which was
Indy.
the biggest metropolitan rating for a metropolitan area for anywhere for the race. I mean, how much did you feel that impacted?
I don't know. The thing is, it's easy for people outside of Indianapolis, I think, to say lift the blackout, and there are people in Indianapolis who say lift the blackout, but a lot of times people are going to the race anyway. So
And a lot of people just love to listen to it on radio and then watch at night. It's just a kind of a tradition for them. But it made sense with the lateness, because what time's the race usually on? Like 7, 6? Like when they repeat.
Oh, yeah. Rebroadcast, usually pre-race at 7, and then the race starts sometime after 8. I mean, I didn't see, did they show this in the early part where Simon Pagenaud did the laps in Gilles de Ferran's car? I never saw that. They did do that
in the pre-race
TV.
Prior to the rain.
Okay.
Yeah, they did.
I did miss that. But which Simon was Scott McLaughlin's, secret advisor.
I don't know why we didn't put that together.
Yeah, I know, right? I feel dumb for not thinking dullards.
Of that. But I get once you knew it was going to bleed over into that quote unquote normal replay time around Central Indiana, it made sense to lift the blackout. But prior to that, it is what it is. I mean, I've never lived in Indy. I've never had to experience it. It's easy for me to say, yeah, lift the blackout, but you have a different perspective for sure.
Yeah, and I grew up watching it on TV when I didn't go, later that night.
Right.
It was easier to avoid the results. It was, early internet days. You didn't have a smartphone, so it wasn't that big of a deal. You had to purposely seek out to find out results.
Yes, absolutely. So speaking of seeking out results, I mentioned to you before we started recording, my dad, who's on a trip with my oldest out west, my parents and my son, has still avoided who won the Indianapolis 500. Now, he will be absolutely thrilled once he actually watches it, because he is a Josef Newgarden fan, but he has avoided. I told him, you're going to go on Peacock and you're going to need somebody to go to the race itself, because it's going to be impossible for him to navigate the menus without, the victory celebration and highlights and showing Josef. So far, it's Thursday morning. He has avoided it. We'll see if he can make it all the way through to this weekend.
Other notes, if you were in Madison on WMTV 15, they cut to a commercial on the final turn of the final lap.
I did see that on Twitter.
Brutal.
Yikes. Whoopsies.
Pato Ward's incredible save earlier in the race. I get why Lee Diffie calls him ninja hands, and that was the perfect example as to why.
Pretty wild.
It was
There were some big-time saves throughout that.
And Callum Ilott, who had a weight jacker issue, started from pit lane. It felt like an F1 race.
Now, did he lose a lap?
No.
Okay.
He did not.
Because they never did kind of say that on the broadcast, and I kind of lost track because it was the start of the race or getting to the green, and they showed him, and then you kind of, obviously other things, especially with the caution coming out early on lap 1. I never did see if he had fallen a lap down or not. So it was good for him to stay on the lead lap and drove a heck of a race to finish 11th.
And for him, early on in the race, I mean, he had that issue with the weight jacker. That was an issue the whole race, where he said it was stuck, maxed out from the beginning to the end, which that's very difficult.
A little bit.
Very difficult to drive a car in an oval with a stuck weight jacker. And he couldn't pass anyone early on. And the fact that he was able to just survive the attrition, he was, the end of the field for a long, long time and finished 11th. A very good day for him as well. One of the other people I want to highlight, we didn't mention Connor Daly, who led a lot of laps, went 29th to 10th, a good result for him in a one-off as well. So
we didn't talk about maybe the biggest story in the motorsports world, at least, with the Indianapolis 500 and Kyle Larson's performance. And we said on the show last week, both of us said Kyle Larson is not going to win this race. He can run. He's going to run well. He can run well, but for him to run a perfect 200 laps at the Indianapolis 500 in his first IndyCar race, Indy 500, all that stuff, it's not going to happen. And sure enough, his first green flag pit stop, which didn't happen until what? Lap 134, I think. Lap 134. Kyle Larson speeding into pit lane. And
again, you have to avoid those mistakes, and that's exactly what we talked about.
And it happens to the best. We've seen Scott Dixon do it.
Yeah. He had a bad start to the race, which is expected.
Yes.
And then he worked his way back up, was running 5th, 6th.
Led a couple laps on pit cycling and all that.
Hopefully we see him back. I think we will. It is a 2-year contract, but he's acting as if, well, I hope to be back.
I'm sure there's fine print, and maybe it's like 2 years, but it doesn't have to be consecutive and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I felt like Kyle Larson, and this is from the IndyCar side of things, NASCAR's having their own issues with Kyle Larson right now.
We're not going to talk about that.
In terms of fair or not or whatever. Technically, he didn't run the double, Caleb. He went to
that's
Charlotte.
Why he should come back and do it again.
Yeah, because he didn't really do the double because of the rain in Charlotte. But I thought for the couple weeks that Kyle Larson was around, and Marshall Pruitt wrote about it in his cool down lap, like Kyle Larson was very accommodating to everyone, didn't walk around like his crap don't stink, like some of these one-offs that Marshall Pruitt kind of mentioned, not names, but you can read between the lines, and really, really enjoyed the process. I was surprised that he committed to staying in Indianapolis, because the story throughout the week was, well, when's Kyle Larson going to have to leave because he can't miss the Coke 600? Well, he ended up missing the Coke 600. And so everything that Kyle Larson did and said and how he handled himself throughout May was exceptional by all indications. And it's good to have. It's a perfect storm for Kyle Larson. You want him to have some success, some fun. You don't want him to win it, of course. You want him leaving with something to look forward to, or something.
Leave him wanting more.
Yes, you want to leave him wanting more, and that's exactly kind of what he said after the race and comments throughout the week. That man, I can't believe I made that mistake. About like it happens, and that's what makes the Indy 500 so special. Is you have to be perfect on all 200 laps, and
not 199.
No, but 200. So I thought Kyle Larson was a great addition to the field this year. Handled himself well, brought in more viewers. I don't think anybody can argue against that. Brought in more interest, and we haven't seen the last of Kyle Larson at Indianapolis. Is it 2025? Who knows? But we'll see him back.
And one other news item to get to before we get into the mailbag and news and notes for this week's episode. Helio Castroneves will be back after all in an IndyCar. He will sub in the number 66 entry for Meyer Shank Racing for Tom Blomqvist for Detroit and Road America only. Now, the verbiage is that Tom Blomqvist agreed to, and the team have mutually agreed to step aside for the two upcoming IndyCar races. That from the release. This is playing out like a driver in Blomqvist, who obviously had a disastrous Indy 500, crashing from the start, taking out Marcus Ericsson, part of their partner satellite team, if you will. And he's a rookie. He struggled for results. And I don't know how to put this any other way than we're talking about leader circle, and the 66 is outside the leader circle, and they feel desperate. Here's what I think will happen. I think Helio will fill in these two races, and either Blomqvist will remain with the team but won't drive again the rest of the year, and perhaps David Malukas will be healthy and be the guy moving forward, and Blomqvist will go back to the sports cars once Shank returns after they're on like a year ban, right?
Yes.
So they'll be back, and I think he just goes back to sports cars. I think that's what happens here. Or if it's not Malukas, then it's just a cast of different drivers the rest of the way.
It could be a variety of things, and it was easy to kind of throw around theories Wednesday when this news came out. You look at it, is it a Meyer Shank thing? And Michael Shank has been vocal in saying he knows the learning curve for Tom Blomqvist and how much it takes to go from sports cars to IndyCar. Is it a sponsor thing? Is there a particular sponsor with Michael Shank that's like, hey, we need better results than what we're getting out of Tom Blomqvist. We didn't pay this money to race this bad, even though I have a hard time looking at that and saying, what did you expect out of a guy that's a rookie? So, and it's not like he's been that terrible. I mean, outside of wrecking lap 1 of the Indy 500, he's been 22nd or 15th, 22nd, 19th, 23rd. At 27 full-time cars, he's not terrible. And my third thing, and I kind of come around to this, is it a confidence thing with Tom Blomqvist? After what happened at the 500, and even his interview kind of just was kind of off, is this a guy that maybe is down on himself?
And it's also easy. I mean, I'm looking at the leader circle standings. Yes, he's 20. That entry is 24th, But the reality, it is 22nd because the number 4 and number 11 Chip Ganassi Racing entries aren't eligible.
Correct. So he's on
the cut line. Yeah, essentially.
He's the top 22 get the money. So I'm almost leaning towards the latter of the three theories. And Tom Blomqvist, especially with the race right after Indy, is maybe he just needs a mental break after the pressures of the 500, the pressures of the month of May, et cetera, is maybe Blomqvist's confidence is just absolutely shot.
We shall see. If you agree or disagree with us, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can always find us, newtrackrecordpodcast.com. That's the website. We have our email list. It is free to subscribe. You won't miss episodes or special announcements. You can also check out the store where we have t-shirts and stickers for you to take a look at on the store as well. You can follow us on social media, IndyCar Podcast on Twitter /X. Also the same handle on Instagram, on Facebook. Just search for New Track Record. We'll show up there. Our email address, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. You can email us there. Or you can support us via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Xavier and others for their support. And as always, download and listen to the podcast for free on your favorite podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict, Overcast, CastBox. Basically, wherever you find podcasts, you can listen in. And if you're in the Fort Wayne listening area, you can listen to an abbreviated version of the podcast on WELT 95.7 FM on Saturday mornings from 8 to 9 a.m. All right, mailbag time. We start with Rate the Race. And again, so many entries that I just averaged it out, which is what we've kind of had to do roughly most of this season, which is a good problem.
Absolutely.
How would you rate the 108th Indy 500?
9 for me.
Why not a 10?
A 10 has to be an absolute, one of the closest finishes. I know this is 7th closest or whatever. I'm saying like a photo finish, all that stuff. I mean,
so like a 2006, 2014 level finish.
I need an absolute crazy race. This was a very good race. 9 is almost as high as I give, but that's where I'm at. 9. Where are you at?
I was going to give it a 10, but now I'm going to go.
You out of it?
Now I'm going to go 9.5 only because of all the crashes and attrition in the first half plus.
Which is something we haven't seen in a couple years.
Yeah.
The last couple years we have a long extended green flag run from the start of the race.
And that, I guess, that would be what held it up, is just having a crash right from the start. I was planning to give it a 10, but a 9.5. The average, and we had a ton of entries on here. The average, I believe I counted up over 36, roughly.
Outstanding.
9.26, so we'll round it up. A 9.3 out of 10. That's where we stood.
Yeah, I think it's fair. But, we were due a 500 where we were going to have a lap 1 caution. It would have been, several years since we had a lap 1 caution.
It's been a while.
And we were due. The last couple years, we've had extended green flag runs before our first caution. And this year we had ones on lap 1, lap 22, lap 28, and lap 56 and lap 86. So before we got even to the halfway mark, we had 5 cautions and just had no real flow. And then once we got into that last portion, which the most extended green flag run we had were the final 46 laps. And I'd rather have that than the opposite, and have an extended green flag run to start and then caution after caution after caution over the final 50 laps or so. So, like I said, we were due for a 500 with plenty of cautions, 46 caution laps to begin with, or for the entirety of the race. But what was it, 600 some on track passes, something like that. And
record number of leaders as well was 16.
49 lead changes. I mean, it delivered when it was under green.
This a reply. So Marshall Pruitt had a good write-up, Racer.com, talking about the next generation of IndyCar Series engines. Poet Shevchenko replying as a positive note toward the likelihood of a new chassis. The OEMs can't physically fit what they want to do into the DW12. And we've had more talk, right, about new chassis. So that's a positive sign. Now, whether it comes in 2027, we shall see.
Well, we know how IndyCar is. They put a year out there, and then whatever they put out, add a year or two to it. But I think we're finally seeing indications that IndyCar is listening to Honda and to a lesser extent Chevy on what needs to happen for this series to keep its OEMs and potentially add others. For a long time, I think IndyCar felt that it knew the way to get OEMs on board, and didn't listen much to Honda and Chevy, and look where it got them. Didn't add anyone. Now they're finally listening and maybe even looking at what's happening in other racing series, IMSA in particular, and seeing what certain amount of innovation and change can get you. So I continue to hope that there's some sort of spec, and I know that's the dangerous word to throw around for a series, a spec engine where everybody can play with it with their electronics and everything. That seems to be the best option, and who knows if it can grab another couple OEMs. But I think the top priority right now needs to be making sure Honda doesn't leave.
Also, a lot of people weighing in, and you had posted about, why did Pato snake it on the backstretch? Why did he do the dragon on the final lap? And people sharing their thoughts as well. DC Soda said, sitting in turn 3 Newgarden, only due to consistently pass guys going into turn 3. I don't think Pato made the right move, but Josef had him regardless, in my opinion. Ben Smith for real said, yep, if Pato keeps the hammer down on the backstretch, Newgarden doesn't get close enough for a run. Hunter's way 67. Yeah, he dove down too hard coming off of turn 2, killed his momentum. I don't think it would have mattered, honestly, because, it's a matter of your car's not going to be good in all 4 turns.
Yeah.
And Newgarden was stronger on the north end of the track. Pato was stronger on the south end. I think it is what it is. I don't think it would have changed anything, but I did find the move odd because it felt like more of a desperate move instead of protect your line going into turn 3. And I get that he forced Newgarden high, but Newgarden had already pulled off that high pass into 3 earlier.
Right.
So it was clear he could do that.
It was clearly he was, and I get it, I understand, focused more on what Newgarden was going to do than what he needed to do. And it's easy to fall on that when you have, especially a guy like Josef Newgarden in your mirrors. That him and Dixon are probably the last 2 guys that I would want running behind me when I'm trying to hold off for a victory. It's easy to question in hindsight. Who knows if he would have held him off? You don't think so? Maybe even if Josef Newgarden makes the pass on the backstretch, could Pato have somehow gotten him in 3 and 4? I don't know, but it could have been inevitable that Josef Newgarden was going to make the pass, but it definitely didn't help with the Dragon coming out of 2.
This from Poet Shevchenko came across this tweet and talking about future TV deals from Pete Pistone. Hearing NBA media rights cost leaves little room for IndyCar. Makes sense. Fox with less NASCAR inventory is in position to take the IndyCar rights. And that's from AJ Perez saying IndyCar expect to make a decision, likely NBC or Fox, on the series' next TV deal over the next month. Again, we thought at the earliest we'd hear it would be, as far as a decision, would be right around the Indy 500. So we'll see.
Well, consider it's a good point because consider the NBA playoffs right now that have been seemingly going on for 3 months. But how much IndyCar content is going to be pushed off big NBC because of the NBA playoffs?
Well, I would say you have IndyCar, then an NBA race often, and IndyCar's NBA game. Yes, thank you. Indy 500 into an NBA game or something like that.
But we've already seen too with the commitments to golf and all that stuff. That was the contingency with Monday, and people were like, "How dare they?"
That was French Open for tennis
or tennis, but that too, golf, tennis. I mean, they have these commitments because people were outraged that, oh my gosh, if the race gets moved to Monday, it's going to have to be on USA. That's the commitment that NBC has made to tennis. Is they can't be bumped. So what are you supposed to do? So at some point, you have too many properties and you have overlapping properties and all that stuff. If it makes sense, and this is what IndyCar has to look at too, is with more properties for NBC and the trend already going towards more USA races, more Peacock races, with NBC getting more sports properties, is that trend going to continue? And while you may like working with NBC and blah, 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 is Fox going to offer you more in terms of being on regular Fox? And if you're not, you're still on a highly visible station in FS1, We've talked about it before, and I think it's a great point too that was retweeted, is pointing that out. And NBC's ledger is filling up with some big properties, and even if they want IndyCar back, does it make sense for IndyCar to re-up if it's going to be pushed off big NBC more and more?
The downside is IndyCar loses a great streaming partner in Peacock.
Yes.
I get that the Venue Sports venture has been announced, but we don't know cost point for that. It's not going to be $6 a month, right, for Peacock. It's going to be $40-$50 a month because it's bundled with a bunch of other properties, including ESPN and Warner Brothers Discovery, so like TNT Sports essentially. So there's a lot with that, and it's like, well, you lose the cheap streaming element, that hurts. But
I mean, you look at it, like how much that's currently on Peacock could find a home on
Fox
FS1.
doesn't have the Coke 600 starting next year.
Right.
So the Indy 500 would obviously be on Fox.
Well, I'm saying too is like how much that's currently on Peacock could be on FS1. Could there be qualifying sessions put on FS1? I mean, that's a benefit, right?
Yes,
so
I would agree.
If you have to hunt for practices, it's not ideal. I think Fox has a deal with which streaming service? Is it Hulu?
I think so.
I think it's Hulu.
Well, but again, that Venue Sports that launches this fall will be
correct. But could stuff that's not on Venue be streamed on Hulu?
Oh, I see.
Instead of Peacock is what I'm saying. So that potentially could be an option. But I mean, these are all things that are thrown up in the air, and I think we're going to get some clarity in the next couple weeks about what direction it's going. It kind of ebbs and flows, and as soon as we think we know, we don't know. There was talks about Fox had dropped out or not talking a couple weeks ago. That proved to be false, and the story from Marshall Pruitt was NBC thought it was all but gone, and now it's not. So who knows what's going to happen? Not only will once it's announced be fascinating, but what that looks like, what the deal looks like for either Fox or NBC will be really fascinating to dissect.
This also, speaking of TV, from Brady BC3, we need a TV network to push IndyCar like ESPN pushed Caitlin Clark and women's basketball. Much like IndyCar, women's basketball had a good product, then ESPN shoved it into everyone's face and made a big deal about it. Eventually, people started watching.
But it's kind of like chicken or the egg thing. Right?
Yeah, I would say you had a dynamic player
going for a major
record.
It's kind of chicken or the egg. ESPN did not create Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark was already an entity, and ESPN took it to another level, helped. What's the Caitlin Clark equivalent in IndyCar? There is not one right now.
Not currently.
So it wasn't ESPN going, hey, we're just going to take this fledgling sport in women's college basketball and just prop it up. No, it was looking at it and say, wow, they have a star, a very entertaining and very big star that they can promote and get big ratings. And it wasn't just ESPN either. But that's kind of the chicken or the egg thing. And it was more Caitlin Clark before ESPN.
And one other note I want to get to in the mailbag. Again, tons of tweets. Thank you, everyone. Keep sending them. We'll have more time to get to them post Indy 500. That's just the way it works. But Poet Shevchenko also sending goodbye, passing using the high groove at Iowa. The Braden _ posted a picture, in fact, multiple pictures of the Iowa track, and you have basically, it's like half a repave.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Why not just repave the whole track?
Money.
Turns 3 through 4, they repaved. Yeah,
I mean, does it take away? And somebody tweeted, is like, does it take away the High Line as a passing?
Yeah, I don't know. That remains to be seen. But you have differing pavement, and you had old pavement at Iowa for a long time, right? You always talk about the bump in turn 2, and you had differing pavement in Milwaukee back in the day. This will be a fascinating thing to watch. Is it helpful for IndyCar? I don't know. It usually never is.
No, it usually never is.
That's the fear.
Well, here's the thing is, and we've seen this time and again, once a track gets NASCAR, every decision they make is to better or quote unquote better the NASCAR product. We saw it at Texas. We saw it at Gateway. And Texas was more because they had already had Cup, but the races were getting stale, so they made some changes. with the PB1, but we saw it at Gateway.
BJ1, but we call it PBJ.
Yes. We saw it at Gateway, which Cup is racing at Gateway this weekend, by the way. But everything is going in town to the moneymaker. And I'm not blaming the tracks, because the check that they get, that 8-figure check for races that they hold, every race they hold for Cup, is a big deal. There's a reason why they accommodate NASCAR so much. But now the NASCAR is going to Iowa, you're seeing the exact same thing. IndyCar has now become secondary at Iowa. It came secondary at Gateway. And this is just the way it is, unfortunately. And IndyCar just has to roll with it.
Time to move on to news and notes, and we'll rifle through several items to get to over the course of the last week. A couple of really fascinating nuggets that we will discuss.
Oh.
And we'll start with, I would say, the most fascinating nugget, Racer.com mailbag, Marshall Pruitt this week, in terms of third OEM, one of our favorite topics on the show. And he had a nugget, and this is interesting. Pruitt said, last I heard was Penske Entertainment talking to Stellantis, which is Dodge, Chrysler, Peugeot, etc., about
Alfa
coming
Romeo.
in with one American brand and one European brand. They're finally taking Honda seriously, and what's likely to happen with the next engine formula is close to what Honda suggested, which Honda wanted spec engines and Ilmor to take over, and then teams could tweak with the ERS or hybrid units, right? So Pruitt goes on to say, it's too soon to tell if the cost cuts and overall increase in value Honda's been seeking will be enough to keep the brand in the series. But at least they're having ongoing discussions, and at least there's a leak of a brand. And
well, there's also discussions of just keeping the existing formula.
Yes.
And
either way, I mean, it would make sense if you go Dodge and, say, Fiat, or Dodge and Peugeot,
Alfa Romeo.
Dodge, Alfa Romeo, right? I mean,
Chrysler and Alfa Romeo, who knows?
Yes. Either way, and then you throw in the fact that Toyota acts like they're doing some groundbreaking thing where they're going to have, they're proposing hybrid plus renewable race fuel. Where have I heard that before? That came down like what, Monday or something?
Yeah, they made it a big deal, right?
And I'm like, you realize you could have joined IndyCar and already had this starting July 7th.
Maybe Toyota comes back around at some point.
Maybe that was the holdup. It's the engine lease. I don't know. But at least IndyCar is trying. I'm not surprised. Penske has ties to Dodge, right? They were in Dodge and NASCAR back in the day. Penske has ties to just about every manufacturer.
Yeah, pretty much. It's easier to say what he doesn't have ties to, but at the very least, it sounds like IndyCar, Roger Penske, Penske Corp are finally listening to its existing partners, as opposed to, we know everything, we know what it's going to take to get new OEMs, and they've completely whiffed. So, A, I think, is cost, or maybe 1A is cost, 1B is hybridization and renewable resources, stuff like that. And I think IndyCar is finally taking both under consideration. And it can only be a good thing whether you're trying to hold on to Honda or add more OEMs or both.
Meanwhile, the Chevrolet Detroit Grand Prix is coming up this weekend. Second year on the downtown Detroit layout. We already talked about Helio Castroneves being in the 66 car. We now know who will be in the Dale Coyne 51 car. It will be Tristan Vautier, the 2012 Indy Lights champ, last race for IndyCar in 2017 for Coyne, replacing Bourdais at Texas.
I was like, what is this, 2014?
Right? It's wild. But yeah, his lone full season campaign was 2013, that per Nathan Brown of the Indy Star. So he's back for Detroit.
If you wondered where he has been, he's been in, he was racing for, what was it, the GT series, I think?
I think so.
Where he's been, I think he did some sports cars too, didn't he? I believe.
Yeah, he's done a lot of sports cars.
Yeah, I did a lot of sports
racing.
cars. So he's been with sports car racing and GT racing. He did Bathurst a couple years ago. So he's been around. It's not like he's been sitting on the couch, but this will be his first race, as you mentioned, since 2017, Texas for Coyne. That was a one-off that year. Well, he raced a lot more in 2015 with Coyne, but 2017 was a one-off. We'll see how he does this week as Dale Coyne Racing with Rick Ware Racing continues that revolving door of drivers.
Yes. Other notes, and talking about engine manufacturers, I missed this. So Mark, is it Reese? He's the GM, one of the higher-ups at GM. After Jenna Fryer posted Ford would welcome GM joining F1 Grid for competition purposes. Of course, obviously, GM trying to compete with Andretti Cadillac, and Mario claims that Mario was basically kicked out of a meeting, right? That came down last week. But Mark Reese said, "Thank you, Mark Rushbrook, who's with Ford, and we welcome Ford to IndyCar for enhancing American open-wheel racing as well."
Who said this? The GM guy?
Yes.
Ford did not respond?
I don't believe so, but he said this on Twitter. He's the president of General Motors, so a high up in the company. I just thought that was interesting to see that thrown out there.
Come help us sustain this series. We can't do it by ourselves. We don't want to have to supply all the engines.
No. Also, some Indy 500 notes. Kristen Juszczyk, Kyle Juszczyk's wife, who designs the jackets, designed a jacket for Josef Newgarden. Pretty cool to see that process put together.
It's going to be an annual thing now, right?
Yes, I believe so. You have Josef Newgarden, who released his children's book, Joseph's Big Dream. Just came out before the Indy 500. You also have the jackets. Penske giving Indy 500 winners these custom jackets, a new tradition.
That was a pretty cool picture. Came out last week.
They were missing a couple of active winners, but basically,
I think it was like 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm. Most of them were there with the Borg Warner Trophy. As far as those who are alive and still with us, received a jacket. And again, the inside has custom pictures and things from their win, so it's a pretty cool new tradition to start out. Also, you have IndyCar, iRacing, and Butt Kicker. Yes, that is the name. Announced the creation of the IndyCar Butt Kicker iRacing Pro Series. That will begin September 19th. Grand prize $50,000. Butt Kicker, apparently, they provide... It's kind of like, you go on an amusement park ride and you're in a simulator type thing and you have vibrations and it basically makes you feel like you're driving an IndyCar with vibrations. It's like a special seat kind of thing is the way
I see. I gotcha. So
that's the way I understand
and all that
it. Correct.
Stuff. Gotcha.
Yes. So
it does kick your butt sometimes on some of those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
And then Detroit coming up this weekend. So we'll preview that. Smokey Robinson will be on the number 60 car, Felix Rosenquist, for the Smokey Soultown on Sirius XM. He also is the Grand Marshal for Sunday's race. And taking a look at what we have coming ahead for IndyCar this weekend. Friday practice, so we're recording it Thursday morning here on, May 30th. So Friday, May 31st, IndyCar practice, 3 to 4:15 Eastern. Peacock, IndyCar Live for International, Sirius XM, and IndyCar Radio. Then on Saturday, practice 2, 9:10 to 10:10 in the morning. And then qualifying for IndyCar, 12:15 to 1:45 in the afternoon. Then you'll have the warm-up on Sunday morning from 9:30 to 10. And then the TV window from noon to 3 on USA and Peacock this weekend. 100 laps for this race. Green flag... approximately 12:45-ish?
Yeah, I believe so. Can we avoid the inevitable moanings and groanings over the weekend from, you go from the Indy 500 on NBC one week to the next weekend being on USA at Detroit? Because it's it's a low-hanging fruit to complain about. It is what it is. I think in a perfect world you have a break right after, a week break. I'm fine with Detroit being next weekend, but this is what the city wants, the promoters want, what Chevy wants. Perfectly fine with it. Yeah, in a perfect world, it's on NBC again, and everybody talks about momentum coming out of the 500, but it's not. And something we didn't mention: total audience delivery for the year. For the first time, IndyCar gets out this after the ratings boost in the Indy 500 is up to date from last year. Now it's
it'll be back down after Detroit.
Was Detroit last year on
NBC? I believe.
Okay, yeah. So it'll be, but at least for a week they can tout that, hey, it's up. And as we say here on the podcast, up is up. But I know plenty of people are just going to jump at that and say, IndyCar needs momentum coming out of 500. They got Detroit on USA. Blah blah blah. Let's just it is what it is. Whatever.
Yeah, I personally would think they would help themselves by going to an oval, but they're helping themselves by having a race.
I think regardless of where you race, preferably it'd be on NBC. But
yes, it is more of a factor.
Yeah.
Couple other notes to get to. The Music City GP, which of course will actually be at Nashville Superspeedway and not downtown Nashville, has become an official team partner of Arrow McLaren IndyCar for the rest of the season, including branding for the 500, which I did see on one of the cars, like on the headrest on an in-car shot, I think on Pato. The season finale race will be seen on the 5 and 7 cars, so that's Pato and Rossi. The rest of the year be the number 6 entry, which will be Teo Porcher, primary sponsor at Milwaukee. So there you go.
Very
and
nice.
Then Nathan Brown of the Indy Star, outstanding read on Zach Brown. A really good profile article on him before the Indy 500. So IndyStar.com, you can check that read out and learn more there. But just a really good article. I don't know if, Justin, you had the chance to read
I did
that.
not. I saw the headline. I have not been able to read it.
And then Karun Chandok, which I need to read this one. He's former F1 driver, obviously, on the Sky Sports F1 broadcast that fans of F1 get on ESPN here in the U.S., but he skipped Monaco, went to the Indy 500 with his dad, and kind of wrote about his observations. His takeaway is every fan needs to check off the Indy 500 on their bucket list.
He's the guy that's always at the screen, right?
Yes.
That's breaking stuff down? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought so. Yeah, he does a great job on F1 broadcast, Sky Sports.
All right, anything that we missed?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot. Now, I'll ask you for Detroit, because there really is no rhyme or reason to this race. People talk about, momentum coming out of the 500, blah, blah, blah. We've seen it the last couple years. Palou finishing 4th at the 500, then come back and win in this race last year. Scott Dixon in 2020 finished runner-up at Indy, then won. But we've also had winners in recent years that have finished outside the top 10 at the 500 and won this. Will Power, Marcus Ericsson, of note in 2022 and 2021 respectively. So you can't necessarily look at the finishes at the 500 and say, okay, who's got the momentum coming out of 500 and who's going to take it to Detroit. I think it's a crapshoot in terms of who could do what. Do you take somebody with the hot hand? Do you take somebody that's going to bounce back from a subpar 500? You can go any type of direction. What direction are you going in?
I have no idea. My guess, I'll just pick Kyle Kirkwood. I mean, he seems to be good on street courses, right? So I'll go with him. I have no idea.
I will go a bounce back performance of sorts and go with Scott McLaughlin to win this race. On the pole, didn't have the finish he thought he would have at the 500. I think he bounces back with a win on the streets of Detroit, and hopefully they've kind of spruced up. You mentioned it earlier, kind of spruced up the area a little bit.
Kind of a concrete canyon. It just needs a little more color, right? A little bit. Just more signage, make it look more vibrant.
There's a lot of concrete.
It's a cool track. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, but the infrastructure around it,
the visuals on TV.
Yeah, I don't care if you
left
put up
some to be desired for year one. But again, you learn things in year one, and then you implement
put up more
grandstands in year
if
two.
anything, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. And it'll be interesting to follow the process of this race, because the centerpiece, of course, being GMHQ, was the Renaissance Center that will soon no longer be the home of GM. I don't know if we've talked about that on the podcast or not.
I think so.
So how does this race potentially change in terms of format in the years going ahead? I don't think that's coming for another year or two, but hopefully it's a little bit more visually enticing than we saw last year. We'll see.
Tweets of the week time, several to get to. And the first tweet, so houses with Indy 500 decorations, they IMS officials and usually drivers will go out and kind of say hi and congratulate.
Did you see the winners?
Yes, the winners had basically, they built their own like podium with flags above it, and Indy IoT Pod said not people building a podium in their front yard that's better than the one they had at Thermal LMAO.
Very true. Jenna Fryer went out there. Their favorite driver showed up, who was Pato Award. It looked like a Latino family, so it made sense. But, man, they went all out. They even put the checkerboard like a
on the
checkered
grass.
flag on the grass. And my first thought was like, it's going to kill the grass. It was half black, half white, But no, it looked really cool. Pato came out and Jenna Fryer was there to document it. It was pretty cool. I can't imagine doing that to the outside of my home, but some people can and do, and they got rewarded by being picked as one of the best, if not the best, and having Pato Award drop by.
Meanwhile, there's a WTHR, which is the NBC affiliate in Indianapolis, article where drivers were asked if they write a book about your life, what's it titled? And Jeff Papone, who covers motorsports in Canada, he said, "Well played, Alex Palou. Well played," because some of the answers. Ed Carpenter said Ed, just Ed. Ramon Grosjean said Facing Death. Santino Ferrucci said The Great Santino. Helio Castroneves said Victory Road, The Ride of My Life. And Alex Palou just responded, Contracts.
At least he can make a joke about himself,
yes.
Right?
You have to.
The joke. Yeah, you have to. But that's pretty witty.
Indy 44 posted, of course, the famous meme of Leo pointing at himself on the TV, but instead put Tim Cindric's face
that was phenomenal.
over it. That was great. And you had this from Christopher DeHard. Saw someone near Gasoline Alley holding a Red Bull and a 5-hour energy that were both open. Godspeed, sir. Let us know what it's like to meet Elvis. And this last one, which is the best one to cap it off, this from 81 Piastri. Actually, technically, it's 81S Piastri. Pato, you need to unfollow everyone on Instagram. It's the only way.
Because NBC will make a huge deal about it at St. Petersburg next year, and you'll go out and win the 500 next year. I also thought the pictures of Carb Day were also very good.
Indy 500 picks a great follow every May.
Saw one of the guy, I presumably it was a guy, passed out in the stall. You only saw his feet. Now, he came prepared, though, because he had shoes and socks on. Like, if you had flip-flops or whatever, you're like, that's a rookie to Carb Day because you do a lot of walking, right? But he seemed to be, at least the bottom half of him or the bottom third or fourth, prepared. It wasn't his first Carb Day, you would think. But hopefully he woke up in time to go home on Friday. But those were good, too.
All right. Random Split Error Driver of the Week time.
All right, we're going back to the inaugural season for the Indy Racing League, going back to 1996 and going with Rob Wilson.
Who?
Rob Wilson from Project Indy. He did 0 races. He attempted to qualify for the 1996 Indianapolis 500 with Project Indy. He actually did a couple years of Indy Lights, 1991 and 1994, with 2 teams I've never heard of in Lights, and came over to try the 1996 Indianapolis 500. And he was entered in a Ford Cosworth XB powered Lola, sponsored by gun manufacturer Ruger. Okay.
Interesting.
Gun manufacturer Ruger. That Ford Cosworth XB powered Lola was 1993 built equipment.
Wow. Well, remember, they were all old cars.
True. Yes. But he was in a 1993 built equipment, so he failed to qualify. He was the third fastest non-qualifier of a total of 10 non-qualifiers that year. Say what you want about the split. It did have plenty of bumping at the Indianapolis 500. Of one of those, of course, being Rob Wilson. That was his only attempt at an IndyCar race or then IRL race. He did some Busch Series races in NASCAR, a couple over the next couple years. He did some 24-hour of Le Mans, most recently in 2005. Did several 12 hours of Sebring as well. This guy, when he attempted to make the Indianapolis 500, was 44 years old. He is now 71 years old. He is a driving coach now in Auckland, New Zealand, where he was born. And he raced in various Formula Racing and Endurance Racing series. Man, if you go through his previous series starting in like 2007, it's like GT3, America Le Mans, 24-hour Le Mans is the most recent. Started in British Formula Ford, Formula 3, Indy Lights, as we mentioned, IMSA. He's been all over the place, but only tried one attempt at an IndyCar race, the 1996 Indianapolis 500. Failed to qualify in 1993 era equipment. this week's random split era driver of the week, Mr. Rob Wilson.
All right, that does it for us this week. We'll be back next week to recap the Chevrolet Detroit Grand Prix, of course, on the streets of downtown Detroit. For Justin Kinney, I am Caleb Hatch. This has been New Track Record Podcast.
Podcasts by Federated Media.